Amazing to me that we've seen this happen with the Lions, and now it's kind of happening with the Pistons. It's like they're 8-2, as you pointed out in a recent tweet, and how they're at the top of the Eastern Conference and they're rolling along. But it's amazing that they lost Ivy at the beginning before the season here. We haven't even seen him yet, and we keep losing different pieces, but they're kind of going with the next man up mentality. And I wrote down that the starting lineup was Cade, Duncan Robinson, Thompson, Holland, and Duren the last game, and then they only had 25 bench minutes in that game, which was kind of amazing to me. And it was a combination of LeVert, Green, Reed, and I think Klintman got out there for a short time. Whereas this game, now there's no Thompson. You've got Green in the starting lineup, I saw in the box score, but they're just continuing to roll on. And you could say, okay, well, these aren't the strongest teams that they're playing against, and the 76ers didn't have Embiid, and now they're playing the Wizards. But this is still impressive that they're doing this with these depth pieces that have already given them early returns here.
Yeah, I think the most important, or like the most impressive thing about the season thus far, to your point, is no matter the context, like no matter what's presented in front of them, they're getting the job done, which is something that you couldn't really have said about the Pistons over the last few years. I mean, last year we saw them really grow up and learn what it means to win a game, but now, like, I think you really see Cade Cunningham truly understands when he needs to put his imprint on the game, when he needs to be more of a playmaking, point guard and facilitator, when he needs to, put the foot on the gas and score the basketball. The thing that's been, just incredibly impressive, to your point, has just been, the identity of this team pretty much, showed that it just carried over almost immediately. And then now they're on like a 5, coming up on a possibly 6-game winning streak. And the signs of truly great cultures are when you can plug and play around your key stars. That's really when teams can be dangerous. And when you have players like Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren playing at the level that they've been playing, it doesn't matter who's on the other side. There's not a whole lot of teams who can match that on both sides of the court when it comes to the physicality, their two-man game, just all the different things that they're bringing to the table. So this is the best Pistons basketball I've seen played since I was 8 years old. And that's saying something. That
is, and how cohesive they've been, especially the two you mentioned. But I've got the box score up right now. One of the things that stuck out to me right away was I didn't see the advanced stats. I just saw points, rebounds, and assists. Now I'm in the rest of it. And Cade, like you said, he knows he's got to be aggressive with this game. He's always the primary offensive guy, but he does try to set everybody up. You're lacking a lot of your secondary scorers other than Duren, and he took. It looks like, I don't know if he took a shot or two in the second half since it started, but 23 shots in the first half. That's very high for Cade. Yep. So he's clearly being aggressive, and it led to 21 points. He's clearly setting the tone there. But I cannot believe this lineup that they have, not only the starting lineup, but the bench players that have played and the bench players that haven't played yet. I mean, we're down into, you've got to know the Motor City Cruise roster. You've got to know the acquisitions here to even know these guys at the back end of the bench and that have even gotten in the lineup here.
Yeah, those sprained ankles are definitely starting to show itself, and that second night of a back-to-back is a very real thing. And this would have been enough to cripple the Pistons in the past and prevent them from even being competitive in these types of games. And, it's still going to be close. It's looking like Washington kind of closed the gap here to start the third quarter, and it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. But, the thing that's been impressive about the Pistons is even when they have gotten punched in the mouth in some of these games, they've weathered the storm and, essentially took their best punches, and then they just came out swinging themselves. Obviously, it's tough when you don't have an Asar Thompson out there on top of an Isaiah Stewart, on top of a Tobias Harris, on top of a Jaden Ivey, not to mention the fact that Marcus Sasser hasn't even really played his first minutes of the season yet. They don't even have Karis LeVert, who, was kind of missed some of the season for them. So, it's definitely like the amount of injuries, that they've dealt with at the beginning of the season is definitely stark, but it speaks a lot to how much of a superstar Cade Cunningham is, that they're still 8-2 and it doesn't even matter.
Exactly. And there's a few themes that I thought we'd be talking about. One is the search for, we've talked before about kind of the 4 and how that was going to go. Obviously, we haven't seen kind of the full plan there because of the injuries. Harris got hurt, and then we didn't necessarily know what we were going to see behind that. Holland's now gotten a start there. There's different players that they've started there. They went with the double bigs with Stu and Duren, which I remember you being involved in this discussion on X, Sean, because it was like there was a period of the Pistons' growth here in the last couple of years that it was like you had to choose Stewart or Duren. I'd like to choose both and have them both on the team because they both add something to the team. And I think you've made a similar point. It's like, okay, well, both these guys are good. They do something a little bit different, but this is Duren's breakout year so far. All of the injuries have definitely showcased Cade, which is no surprise, which he was going to be showcased either way. But Duren has really been the revelation through this injury period here.
Duren's been unbelievable. I mean, when I posted a tweet the other day of legitimately, it was just a side-by-side photo with, like on one side it was Jalen Duren and on the other side it was Dwight Howard. And really the point I was making was not even as much like the way that he plays the game, but just like how physically imposing and athletically dominant he looks. Like, there's really only one game on the schedule thus far where I can say I feel like bigs have really matched his intensity and athleticism, and that's Cleveland. Like, just about every single other night, there have not been guys who have been able to keep up with what he's been able to do. And I think, like, the big secret is he's just been a lot more aggressive on the offensive end. Like, JB talked about how they've wanted him to be more aggressive, to take more opportunities, to, be more active, looking for, his shots at the rim. And, especially just, I think the fact that for a guy like Jalen Duren, this is like the first time that he's had the same coach 2 years in a row. So not having to learn a new system, knowing exactly where they expect you to be, all those different things, like that makes a massive difference. So I think that's like one of the, a lot of the big reasons why you're seeing him do so well. And to your point, now that Isaiah Stewart has even gotten better with his, like with his 3-point shot, and now that, he's continuing to be as dominant of a rim protector as he is, and how much like those two just really complement each other in the way that they play the game, there's a lot of reason to believe that, you're just going to find nothing but success if you see those two together. And one thing that you're seeing, throughout the league is a lot of the teams, especially the good teams, have at least one double big lineup that they can point to and, and pull out if necessary. And I would argue that Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart together is like one of the better double big lineup combinations that you can have. So the fact that those two are playing the best that they've ever played is just scary for opposing teams.
And really haven't gotten an opportunity to play together that much. I think they would have if not for the injuries and what's going on with the team. But I totally agree with you because there was clearly a trend away from, we're not going to have the back-to-the-basket centers. We're not going to have double big lineups. We're going to have more athletic 1 through 4. Everybody's got to be able to shoot. You can maybe have a 5 that doesn't shoot the 3, but they've got to have switchability. And now I've liked the recent sea change. That was like the last change, and now there are a lot more double big lineups. You talked about Cleveland. They're kind of one of the more prominent ones, but I'm with you on this Detroit double big because one of the things that I wasn't sure if they had on the roster, because I didn't know they were going to play Stewart the way they have at the 4, I said, okay, well, what do we do when Harris is off the floor? Who's the 4? Does Thompson go 2-4? Are they going to play Holland there? Because that was what a lot of the depth charts were looking like, but I wasn't really sure if that's where he slotted in. But I like the fact that depending on what the roster is on the other side, what the lineup is on the other side, that they can put Stu in there against certain formats. And like you said, he's a switchable big. He's shooting the 3 better. He's doing a lot of things well. And I think that's one of the big highlights with Duren is that he we tend to make people one thing. That's been one of the themes of the show so far, other than cupcakes apparently. But there's been we've been talking about how we can only see one thing, and when you see Duren, you see strength and you see power. But he's got a nice handle for a big guy. He's a good passer as a big guy, and those skills are getting an opportunity to flower and develop because of the role he's been put in. And now when you're searching for that number 2 guy next to Cunningham, where you thought it was maybe going to be Ivy or Thompson grows into that, now Duren's saying, hey, why can't it be me?
Yeah, exactly. And, a lot of people are kind of, have been asking me about the fact, like, oh, should Detroit have, should they have signed him in the offseason? Did they make a mistake by not locking him up when they could have? And I understand why people feel that way, especially, because you look at the way the Lions do things and Brad Holmes and their philosophy is to lock up guys early when you can. I would say that if you look at some of the previous production from Jalen Duren, the reports, suggest that he wanted north of $30 million a year. And if you look at some of the ways that he's played in the past, he just wasn't worth that off of previous production. Whereas now he's literally up almost double his almost double his point average. So there's a very significant difference when it comes to the level that we're seeing, from him now versus where we were even a year ago. So, and on top of that, quite frankly, as a player who Jalen Duren has come out before and admitted that there were times where he felt like he was playing soft, I don't think it's bad for them to have the motivation of a contract. And if he continues to play at this level, you'll be glad to sign him to whatever number you can, because when a player's truly that good, no matter what the number is, it always feels like a steal.
Especially because in the modern day here, if you can draft a guy and then lock him in, that's a lot different math than trying to sign him in free agency. Yep. And so, yeah, I like being able to see him, but yeah, I like that he's elevating. He's still a very young guy. I think his stature and his general look, we just attribute him to being an older guy, but he's just not by age. He just looks, he's massive and he's got an older looking face. So he looks a little bit older and more mature, and he plays strong now, so we're giving that to him. But yeah, go ahead, Sean.
He turns 22 in a week and a half.
Exactly. He's just barely old enough to drink a beer, let alone play in the big leagues here and all that. So yeah, he's
can't
been
even run a car.
That's true. And he's probably he could still be on his parents' insurance plan here too, if he wanted to be. I don't know why he would need to be. I guess he's getting paid good enough probably to be off of it. But yeah, there's so many things. It's amazing. So it's fun to see him so far. I want to take a quick break. Sean's given us great stuff so far, but the Pistons have fallen. They've lost their lead a little bit. So I think the fact that we pulled Sean away from the game is making the Pistons not play quite as well. So we got to give them a little break. We got to make sure they add a few points in the break, and we'll be right back here with Sean Murphy. He's given us great stuff so far, and we'll talk to him a little bit more about this 8-2 start. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with friend of the show, Sean Murphy, giving us great stuff on the Pistons so far. I'm curious what we've done a good job talking about Duren and Cade so far, but they have had a lot of these other guys that have been role players that have filled in. I just don't think we would have, if you would have said, okay, they're going to be, by this point in the season, they're going to be without Stewart and they're going to be without Ivy, and he wouldn't have played a game yet, and Thompson's out and Harris is out. If you would have said that guys like Javonte Green and Paul Reed and Lanier's been getting a lot of minutes in this particular game, Robinson hasn't hit full form, but he's played fairly well. It's just interesting to see this team gel so well, but I'm curious who else has stuck out to you other than Cade and Duren, who are kind of the obvious two starters here that have excelled with this injury kind of cobbled together roster here.
Right. I would say for me, one of the guys that's been really impressive thus far is just the year 2 leap for Ron Holland has been very real. Just specifically with the pressure that he can provide on the ball as a defender. He already brought a lot of energy and intensity on that side last season, but now he can bring some of the IQ and the smarts alongside it. And then on top of that, he's just gotten better as a finisher, at the rim. He's more confident as an offensive player. He just, and when him and Asar Thompson are on the court together, it is literal havoc for offenses. They break plays. They disrupt whatever actions these teams are trying to run. So those two in conjunction are just an incredibly fascinating wing pair that when I think of postseason basketball, I think those are two guys that are going to give coaches and players alike just a lot of fits and, cause them to stay up a little bit later at night because they have to game plan and accommodate for them. And to your point, like with Duncan Robinson and Karis LeVert, like Duncan, a little bit more so has been available and has been able to kind of get acclimated in his role. And it hasn't always looked perfect, but he's hitting shots at a consistent enough level. He's actually having moments where he's looking pretty decent on the defensive end. There's definitely times where you can tell that he's being targeted on the defensive side of the ball, but overall, especially for the fact that you're going to have a hard time replacing one of the greatest shooting seasons in the history of the league. I think he's done a really good job with that. On the other side of things, Karis LeVert, he's kind of been working his way back into the lineup, kind of, starting the season with a little bit of an injury, not being 100%, coming out of training camp, kind of has some knee soreness and is out in tonight's game. But even without, kind of the offensive input or output that he might be used to in previous spots in his career, he's still playing really hard on the defensive side of the ball. He's still giving them, like really high level play for what he's being asked to do. So I think it's just incredibly impressive, especially when, there are a lot of other teams like Atlanta, like Orlando that, kind of had, more flashy summers, if you will, than the Pistons did. But I think just that culture that they have in place is really just allowing these new guys to come in, and they know exactly how they need to fit in. They know exactly what's being expected of them. And as a result, I think you're seeing them succeed because of it.
There were a lot of great points in there, but the last one is the one that really stuck out to me because we talked about this in the context of the Durant trade to the Rockets. You mentioned the teams in the East, obviously, but that Rockets trade was a big flashy trade, and we'll see what happens. They're a good young team too, and that's a good addition. But I like this team building strategy. If you've got a young core that you feel like you can develop and not taking the big swing quite yet, not messing with the culture too much, I just think that goes awry more often than you'd think. And it's more of like a public perception thing where the fans want that and it's a win now strategy, but this is a more sustainable strategy to your point of signing Duren and locking him up to go with some of the other pieces that you already have on. I remember when we thought the Stewart contract, well, not us two, I don't think, but when some of the public perception was that the Stewart contract was a bad contract. Now that's looking very good with the cap changing and with him developing his skill set. That's going to be a total bargain by the end of his deal. And then you add Duren in, maybe Ivy gets in the mix. You got Thompson, you got Holland, you got some other people coming, and we'll see what those contracts end up looking like. But you've got the pieces on the team where you just build around this and layer in veterans, and you can really foresee this being a championship level team at this point with the young core and layering guys in. I wanted to make a comparison too, because you were talking about Holland and Thompson, and I feel like they are kind of given that same duality that Duren and Stewart are, that like, okay, well, you can't play them on the court at the same time, and they have different skill sets, and you got to choose one or the other. And I think you made the best point, which is how I see it too, because there is some, I do see, it's like when Duren was coming up, you have his physical build. I know people were saying, well, if you combine that with Stewart's effort level, you'd have this cyborg type player. It's like, but that's not how it works. If you have that physical presence, you don't necessarily develop those other skills. It's the same with Holland and Thompson, but they do go together well, and they're clearly raising up their skill sets. And that pressure, like you said, that Holland, because he's the Stewart, he's the one with the pressure, he's the effort guy. Thompson's a little smoother. He's got a great athletic build, great skill set, but they pair well together, just like we're seeing with Stewart and Duren.
Yeah, and with all this talk about the importance of the three-point shot, how the game is getting increasingly more offensive heavy, like I think like one of the things that you have to look at about this Pistons team is the way that they're winning games is by scoring points in the paint and defending at a high level. Like they're number one in the league at points in the paint, and they're third in the league in defensive rating. So, like, when you talk about, like, yes, don't get me wrong, like, you need to be able to space the floor. You need to be able to score, in half-court offense and to be able to have guys that you can consistently rely on, to get you offense. But at the same time, like, the Pistons are doing it the way that they've always done it when they've been successful. It's just they're doing it with, like, a new, like, modern-day mold and twist. And I think one of the things that's, like, really beneficial about the way that they're playing and, just one of the beneficial things about the tactic and like the approach that Trajan took is he probably could have made a trade this summer, kind of like what Orlando did, and gone out and taken like a good guess at like what they need to take another step. But Orlando kind of had a weird year last year. So it's not even necessarily like their trajectory was like on a continual upswing. Now they're 4-6. There's questions about their coach. And like what they're going to be doing going forward there. Whereas now, like if you're the Pistons, like they're being talked about as, like a potential buyer down the road, as like, like someone can, a team that can go and get someone, in the market. And one of the names that I heard today that I just keep throwing around as someone that could bring some real offensive scoring power, someone that could also like really fits the defensive mold, someone who's from Michigan and gets the identity of what this team's trying to be. Could you imagine if they somehow are able to get Jaren Jackson Jr. and still keep Duren and Stewart?
That would be amazing. I was wondering where you're going with that. I've tried to think about what would be a good pairing with those two when we weren't sure what that would look like with them with them on the floor at the same time. That's looked better this year, but you still need a rotation. You need a big man rotation to go with those two guys, and ideally a third guy that is also a flexible big 4 or 5 in that Jaren Jackson Jr. mold, and that would look amazing. And obviously the Grizzlies are in a little bit of an uncomfortable spot. I don't know what's happening with Morant, and they changed the coach, and that doesn't seem to have helped in the early going. And so you've got a problem there. I could see two things. I could see Jackson wanting to go to a Pistons team that's a young team on the rise and wanting out of Memphis at the same time. So that would be amazing. I don't know do you have an idea of what you would think package wise they would have to put together? Because that's obviously the idea is cost wise. What are you giving up? I'm okay with giving up future picks because if that's your swing, to me, that's a pretty good swing. But as far as players on the team and putting contracts together, I know the contract package always ends up being a combination of like Harris and Ivy and because that works for a lot of these contracts. But I'm curious what you see with that.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those situations where, and whenever people hear me talk about this, I always like to make clear that this isn't me saying that I think the Pistons should trade Jaden Ivey or they should ship him out. But when you just look at the nature of the roster, he's the most natural centerpiece of a trade. Kind of think of like Josh Giddey in Oklahoma City, where he's a really good player, a solid young prospect, but he just might not be what this team needs right now. And so, like, when looking at, like, situations where it would make sense, I mean, one thing about John Morant is his mom spent time in Memphis on the coaching staff. One of his role models is John Morant. And if Memphis is indeed looking to move off of John Morant, which what they're going to find out is they're probably not going to be getting the trade market that they're going to be hoping for. They're going to probably have to move off of a Jaren Jackson Jr. in order to truly rebuild in the way that they would want to and get assets. So I think, anything around like Jaden Ivey, Tobias Harris, just like you said, because of the salaries, I wouldn't be surprised if they asked for like a Chaz Lanier or just like another kind of like fringe young player who's at least kind of like a prospect on a cheap salary, and then it would probably be some picks. But it's interesting with Jaren Jackson Jr. because he's had some health issues, there's kind of like some inconsistency pieces, but he's also won Defensive Player of the Year before, right? So it's like this is someone where, I know it might sound like a logjam at the big position, but this is someone who can stretch the floor, someone who has like some real scoring capabilities. When I just think of like the ways that you could just really lean into the way that this Pistons team is thriving and just make things really uncomfortable for opposing defenses, he would just be a real problem for other teams if you had him, Cade, and Duren on the court together. Like, how do you deal with that?
I totally agree, and you're getting a double big lineup that you can't really play off the floor at that point. You've got either Jackson and Duran or Stewart and Jackson, and you can't play those guys off the floor. You can't find the weakness and take advantage of the lack of switchability or stretching to the 3-point line or whatever it is. So that'll be interesting. We'll definitely be having you back on to follow up throughout the season. So we'll have to have you back on probably before then for sure, but around the trade deadline and at different points in the season and check in. But I got to send you back to the game because I see the lead is going up here from the Wizards. So we got to get you back to the game so you can salvage the fourth quarter for us. But we appreciate you joining the show, and be sure to tell people where they can follow you to get more of this great coverage here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. People can follow me on Twitter at Sean Halfcourt, but also check out the podcast on YouTube from Half Court. We actually did an episode right before the Wizards game, so if you're looking for an up-to-date episode, we have one right there. But on top of that, I'm also doing more writing this season on Substack at From Half Court. It's entirely free to follow and subscribe, so if you want to follow that too, that'd be great. But Ryan, thanks as much again for having me.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, DDS, Calder Financial Group, Grand Management, Rydan Investments, JH Realty Partners, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro FM.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.